Hello and welcome back to my YouTube channel for Juls Creations. And now let's continue with part 2 of 3 on how to work with polymer clay for beginners. All right, so now our clay is ready and we can build our snowman. We're going to start with the body and we'll take a piece of clay about the size of the snowman we want, plus a little, and then roll it into a tube by gently rocking the flat of our fingers back and forth. We're aiming for about 3/4 of an inch, and that will be the width of our snowman. Next, use the clay cutting blade to cut off a 3/4 inch piece for the base and a slightly smaller piece for the middle and an even smaller one for the head. These sizes don't have to be exact. Now we take the largest piece and roll it into a ball, placing it between our palms, and we want to lift our fingers apart slightly so they don't catch, and then just rotate our hands in opposite directions like this. Then we set the ball aside and repeat the process for the middle and the head pieces. Now, if you want to adjust the size, you can just add or remove a little bit of clay and re-roll it. I'm going to make this base a little bit bigger by adding a little more clay and squish it in and roll it around again. And now this base is slightly larger, which is much better. And to keep the base of our project from rolling around, we want to gently press the piece down onto the table to flatten the bottom of it. And then if we were to just place the middle piece on top, it would roll off. So instead, we're going to use a toothpick to stabilize it. So we snap a toothpick in half. It doesn't have to be perfect. You can use cutters if you prefer, but it's not necessary. And then insert half of the toothpick into the base, leaving the other half exposed, and then slide the middle piece onto that. And since polymer clay bakes at a low temperature, the toothpick won't burn, and if you prefer, you can always use wire instead. Now we'll do the same for the head. This one looks a little bit too big, so I'm going to pinch off a little clay and then just re-roll it to the size I want. And then we'll use a toothpick to support it. Take the other half of the broken toothpick and insert it halfway into the body, then place the head on top. Now rotate your snowman around and find the best looking side, and that will be our face, so we'll want to put that in the front. And we also want to add one more half toothpick on the top of the head. That will be the support for our hat when we add it. Now our snowman needs a nose, and we want a teeny tiny piece of clay for the nose. Obviously this piece would be huge on him, so let's make it tinier. And we want to start by making a tiny ball. So for tiny pieces, rather than using both palms, we can just use one fingertip against our palm, just rolling it in circles to make the ball and then set it on the table. And now we can use one finger and gently roll one side of the ball back and forth, and that will create the point for the nose. If it's too big, you can pinch off a little clay and just reshape it. And now this is about the size that we want for the snowman's nose. Now let's mark where the face pieces will go. Using a toothpick, we'll mark some tiny indentations for the eyes, nose, and 5 small marks for the mouth. And if anything goes wrong, no worries. We can always re-roll the head and start fresh. For tiny pieces like the nose, our fingers could very easily squish them, so instead we want to use a razor knife or the corner of your cutting blade to carefully pick up the nose and place it onto the snowman's face. Then very gently we can push the base of the nose into the head to attach it, but making sure not to distort the shape. And there we have it, his little nose. We'll be using more of the orange clay later for the scarf and gloves, so let's set this aside for now. And now we're going to work with the black clay, and we want to make our face pieces and the hat. So let's start with making our largest piece first, and that would be the hat. First, let's roll out our black clay into a tube using the flat of our fingers, gently rocking it back and forth. And you'll want to press and rock as you go, allowing the clay to stretch and thin out. And you can shape your hat to be as tall, short, wide, or narrow as you like. I'm going to make this one about the width of the snowman. Next, we cut off the tip to create a clean edge, and then we can measure and cut the main hat piece to a desired height. After that, we'll cut a second piece of similar width, and this will be for the brim, and just set the brim aside for now. Now take the hat piece that goes on top and just lightly tap the edges just to soften them. Then you can use one fingertip to gently rub over the top surface to smooth it out, and this technique is called burnishing. Burnishing removes any rough edges or fingerprints, giving the hat a polished look. Now that the base of our hat is shaped and smooth, let's go ahead and attach it to our snowman, sliding it onto the toothpick. And then the hat will also have a rim, which we will make later so that it doesn't get in our way. Now we're going to work on our face, starting with a small piece of black clay. Doesn't matter how big, just roll it into a ball. Then we're going to roll that ball into a tube about 1/8 of an inch thick. But since this is a small piece of clay, instead of using the flat of our fingers, we want to just use the flat part of 1 or 2 fingertips and just gently rock it back and forth against the table into a very skinny tube so we can cut off some tiny pieces. Next, we cut off the tip to create a clean edge. And we want to cut off 2 pieces of equal sizes for the eyes. And since we want the mouthpiece to be smaller, we're going to go ahead and roll the tube even skinnier and then just cut off the end piece again and make that clean edge. And then we're going to cut 5 pieces of equal size. Okay, now let's roll each of these tiny pieces into balls. We can roll them in the palm of our hand if we want, but for really tiny pieces, I find it easier to roll them with one fingertip onto the table like this. And you can see the mouthpieces are all the same size, and then the eyes are just slightly bigger. Now that we've already marked where the pieces go, let's pick up one eye, and again with the razor knife or the corner of the cutting blade, we're going to pick up each piece one at a time and just place it onto the snowman. And I'm tapping the eye very, very lightly just to make the pieces connect, making sure not to squish the pieces. And then we're going to add our mouth. And I start with the middle piece just so that I know it's centered. And then I just tap it down, being careful not to flatten it. And then the next piece goes to the left or the right of it, making sure that there's a little gap between the pieces so that they're not touching. And since our hands are already black, let's go ahead and finish working with the black clay by finishing the hat. So the next step is making the rim. And to create the rim, take that second piece of clay that we cut earlier, and then we begin rolling it into a long, very thin strip, making sure that it's long enough to wrap around the base of the hat. Use light, even pressure while rolling it, and keep a consistent thickness. And the strip will most likely be too long, but we'll trim that later. So let's start in the back and we'll start wrapping it around. Just follow around the base of the hat, and where the ends meet, we're going to go ahead and cut that with our cutting blade to cut off the excess. Then we're going to take our finger and smooth it back and forth, and that will burnish it into a nice smooth finish. And we want to give our rim some width, so with our fingertips, very gently, we're going to pinch the edges just to sharpen it and just repeat all the way around. And then there we will have our rim, and that will finish our hat. And since we're done with the black, it's time to wash our hands, so I'll be back in a minute. And now it's time to make our scarf. So we're going to start with a piece of flat clay and just roll out the slab of clay. But before we continue, let me show you a little trick when cutting. When we use our cutting blade, it's usually a very sharp edge, like this. But since we want the scarf to look soft and natural, we want our edges to be soft and tapered. So to do this, we're going to lay a piece of plastic wrap over the clay before we cut. And so here is the sharp edge, and here is the tapered edge. And the plastic wrap made the top edges rounded and pretty, more like fabric. All right, let's continue. So we want our scarf to be nice and long. So let's cut a piece about the width that we want, and then we want it long enough to wrap around the front of the snowman and drape down in the back, and then also drape down in the front. And then we're going to add our orange stripes to the scarf. So using the dull edge of the cutter, we can gently mark some lines into the clay to mark where the stripes will go, just for reference. Then we take our orange, which will make our stripes, and we'll roll it into a ball. Then we'll roll that into a very skinny, skinny tube. And this will be good practice to work with very tiny pieces very delicately. And then starting with one edge of the scarf, we lay one edge of the orange strip across the scarf vertically where we marked it, and then just trim. And it's fine if the orange strips drape past the white clay because we're going to trim that away. And then we just keep adding and trimming the stripes, spacing them evenly until the scarf is fully striped. And then to blend the stripes into our scarf, we can lay our plastic wrap over the top and then use our acrylic roller to gently roll up and down vertically over the scarf. But we don't want to roll it horizontally because that will skew the stripes. And then you can run your finger over the top and feel if it's level or not. If it still feels bumpy, then you'll need to roll it some more. Now trim the edges again with the plastic wrap in place. This removes any excess clay and gives the scarf a smooth tapered edge. And then we can gather the scraps and set them aside. Now we can take our cutting blade and just gently press the side, and that will smooth them out a bit. And now if you lift the clay, it will pull and get stretched out. So instead, we're going to take our cutting blade and just slide it underneath. And then this will release the clay from the work table so we can lift it up. Now we'll attach our scarf just like we're putting it on a person, starting at the back and then wrapping it around the front and then draping it down. And then we'll bring the other piece from the back over the front and drape it over the first piece and then down again. And I see we could have added some stripes here, so let's do that now. So we mark the lines with a dull edge, roll a thin orange strip and place it, trim the excess, and repeat until the scarf is fully striped. Then we'll cover it with plastic and press gently to level it out. And then trim any extra for a smooth finish. And this end of the scarf has a slight curve, so we'll use the corner of the cutting blade to score along the edge, making it easier to follow the shape while we cut it. Then we remove the extra pieces and smooth the side edges with our blade. Then again, we want to loosen the clay from the table, so sliding the cutting blade underneath it. Then let's place our scarf on the snowman again, starting from the back, draping it over the front and down the back. Then bringing the back piece over the front and draping it down. And since it's a bit thick, I'm going to push it down a little away from the face, just a little bit. So this is a really, really long scarf. So to shorten it, lay the front edge over your finger and being careful not to cut your finger, we're going to gently press the cutting blade at an angle to break off the end. And then the same on the back edge. Then we take our fingers and gently pinch the edge just to soften it up and shape it into a point. And then remember, it's supposed to look like fabric, so we don't want it to be perfectly straight. So you can pinch a little here and there just to kind of make it look more fabric-y. Is that a word? Now we want to give our snowman some arms and gloves. So take the last toothpick and break it in half evenly. Now the pointed edge will be going into the gloves and the fatter end will be going into the body. So let's make our gloves. So let's take a small piece of orange clay and roll it in a tube long enough to make 2 gloves. And this piece is a little big, so I'm going to cut one piece about the size I want and then lay it next to the tube and measure a second piece of the same size. And this way each glove will match in size. And for future projects, this is an easy way to cut multiple pieces of the same size. Next, we'll roll our clay pieces into 2 balls of the same size, and those will be our gloves. And then we just flatten each ball, making sure that it's thick enough to hide the toothpick when inserted. Now we'll slide the skinny end of the toothpick into the center of each piece, making sure that it goes deep enough so that the gloves won't fall off. Now we have our 2 arms with almost gloves. Then to shape the thumbs, we'll take another toothpick as a tool and gently press inward to separate the thumb. Then lift the base slightly upward. Then we'll do the same on the second glove. Feel free to use your tool to customize the shape, get creative, and make it how you want. And then at the bottom of each glove, we're going to gently flatten it by using our blade, just pressing it up very gently. And there we have 2 gloves. And if they end up too thin, you can always add a little more clay and reshape them. And if you do have liquid clay, you want to apply that before baking. So you can dip the ends of the toothpick in the liquid clay just before attaching the gloves and also the arms to the snowman. And then when it bakes, it'll work like a glue. It'll dry hard and clear, securing everything in place. All right, time to attach our snowman's arms. And when you hold the arm, try not to touch the glove since they're very delicate until baked. And we'll attach the arms just slightly above the center of the snowman's body, angling them up just a little bit. Gently twist the arm back and forth while we push it into place, and that will help it to slide without squishing the body. On the other side, we'll repeat the process, making sure the arm is at the same height as the first arm, and right under the scarf, angled up just slightly. And here is our snowman ready to bake. And this little guy is going to be baked on a ceramic tile. But before baking, we can make any final adjustments, repositioning the arms or adding small touches like little buttons down the front or ceramic flower in the hat rim. You can always use a cotton swab and blush or a pastel chalk for rosy cheeks. And if we want to turn him into an ornament, this is where we would add the eye screw in the top of the snowman. And I won't be doing these steps right now because I want to show you how you can do them after baking, just in case we were to forget. And just a note, if after baking the gloves and arms feel loose, we can carefully pull them off, add a small amount of clear drying glue with a toothpick, and reattach them. And be sure to let the glue dry completely, and of course we won't want to bake it again after adding glue. Part 3 of 3 will be next. Feel free to take a break, and I'll see you on the next video.